July 1944. Saipan. A narrow coral road runs between sugarcane and shattered concrete. A United States Army sergeant named William Anders crouches behind the fender of a truck, sweat cutting channels through dust on his neck. He hears it before he sees it. A flat mechanical clatter, not fast, not loud, just steady. The sound is coming from a tank that looks almost ordinary. Boxy, tall, painted in dull olive. It weighs just over 30 tons. Its main gun is 75mm. Its top speed on paper is around 25 miles per hour. Nothing about it looks terrifying, and yet the Japanese soldiers dug in along that road have already started to withdraw. The tank is an M4 Sherman. And by this point in the Pacific War, Japanese troops do not just fear it, they hate it, not because it is invincible. Not because it cannot be destroyed, but because it breaks their assumptions about how armoured war is supposed to work. And once those assumptions collapse, everything else follows. This was the M4 Sherman. It was the standard American medium tank of the Second World War. It carried infantry forward, delivered high explosive fire on demand, and forced the Imperial Japanese Army to fight a kind of armoured war it was never designed to survive. The common myth says Japanese soldiers hated the Sherman because it was unstoppable. That is wrong. The real reason is more uncomfortable. The Sherman exposed a brutal mismatch in doctrine, industry, and battlefield priorities, and it did so again and again, at distances measured in tens of yards and time measured in seconds. To understand why the Sherman inspired such hostility in the Pacific, you have to understand the problem the Japanese army thought it had already solved. Before the war, Japanese planners believed armour would play a limited role in island fighting. Tanks were expected to be light, narrow, easy to ship, easy to repair. Most Japanese tanks weighed under 15 tons. Many carried guns in the 37mm range. Armour thickness was often less than 1 inch. The logic seemed bulletproof. Heavy tanks were hard to move by sea, fuel was scarce, roads were poor, infantry would decide the fight. The problem was brutally simple. The Pacific War did not unfold on paper. By 1942, American amphibious doctrine had matured. Landings were supported by naval gunfire, close air support, and critically armoured vehicles that could come ashore early and stay in the fight. A Sherman could wade through surf, climb coral terraces, and keep moving after absorbing small arms fire that would shred lighter vehicles. Its frontal armour was roughly 2 inches thick. Its side armour was less, but still enough to stop rifle fire and many light anti-tank weapons at common engagement ranges of 50 to 100 yards. Japanese infantry doctrine emphasized close assault. Soldiers were trained to stalk tanks at night, crawl close, and destroy them with satchel charges, magnetic mines, or bundled grenades. Those tactics required time, darkness, and above all, isolation. A tank alone could be killed. A tank advancing with infantry, artillery, and radios was a different animal entirely. And that was the first thing the Sherman brought that the Japanese hated: integration. On paper, the Sherman was just a tank. In practice, it was a node in a system. Each vehicle carried a radio. Not a luxury, not an optional extra. A standard feature. American tank crews could talk to each other, to infantry officers, and to artillery units in real time. That meant response times measured in seconds, not minutes. If a Japanese position opened fire from a tree line 60 yards away, the Sherman did not have to hunt blindly. It could stop, traverse its turret, and deliver a high explosive shell almost immediately. That 75mm gun mattered, not because it punched through heavy armour, it did not, but because it threw a shell weighing over 15 pounds, packed with explosive, accurate enough at a few hundred yards to demolish log bunkers, caves, and trench lines. Japanese fortifications were often built for concealment and resilience against infantry weapons. They were not built to withstand repeated direct fire from armoured guns firing point blank. Here is where the trade-offs come into focus. Japanese tanks favoured low profiles and lighter armour to improve concealment and transport. The Sherman was tall, nearly 9 feet to the top of the turret. In Europe, that silhouette was a liability. In the Pacific, it mattered less. Engagement distances were short. Vegetation was dense. What mattered was not who saw first, but who could absorb the first hit and keep fighting. The Sherman could. Its gasoline engine was not exotic. It produced roughly 400 horsepower. It was loud. It ran hot. But it was reliable. Field reports regularly recorded Shermans travelling hundreds of miles between major mechanical failures. Japanese tanks, by contrast, often struggled with maintenance, spare parts, and fuel quality. A disabled tank on an island might as well be a coffin. And that leads to the second reason Japanese troops hated the Sherman. It kept coming back. American production treated tanks as consumable tools. Between 1942 and 1945, the United States produced roughly 50,000 Shermans in multiple variants. Factories were standardized, parts were interchangeable, crews were trained to abandon disabled vehicles and mount replacements. For Japanese defenders, destroying a single Sherman did not change the tactical situation. Another one would arrive, often within hours. That psychological effect cannot be overstated. Japanese after-action reports describe frustration bordering on fury. A Sherman would advance, be hit, burn, and then another would roll forward on the same road the next day. Or the same afternoon. The message was clear. Attrition favoured the attacker, and the attacker knew it. The engineering reality behind that confidence was simple and ugly. The Sherman was not optimised for elegance. It was optimised for throughput. Its armour was rolled steel, not cast to extreme thickness. Its gun was powerful enough, not perfect. Its suspension was forgiving. Its tracks were wide enough to handle sand and mud without sinking. Everything about it screamed adequacy at scale. This was not meant to win duels. It was meant to win campaigns. Japanese anti-tank weapons struggled against that philosophy. The Type 95 light tank's main gun could penetrate the Sherman side armour only at very close range, often under 100 yards, and only with favourable angles. Infantry weapons required suicidal proximity. Magnetic mines demanded direct contact. Against a tank supported by riflemen and machine guns, that approach turned into a slaughter. American crews learned quickly. Shermans advanced with infantry riding on the hull or moving just behind. Machine guns swept likely approach routes. The tank's coaxial and bow machine guns poured out suppressive fire at a rate of hundreds of rounds per minute. A Japanese soldier trying to close the final 20 yards faced not just the tank, but an entire moving wall of coordinated fire. And then there were the variants. By late 1943, Flamethrower Shermans began appearing in the Pacific. These vehicles replaced the main gun with a projector capable of firing burning fuel over distances of 100 yards or more. Against cave systems and fortified positions, the effect was devastating. Flamethrowers bypassed the geometry of cover. Fire flowed where bullets could not. Japanese troops despised these machines, not because they were mysterious, but because they were brutally logical. A flame tank turned terrain itself into a weapon. Caves that had resisted days of bombardment could be neutralized in minutes. The mere presence of such vehicles altered defensive plans. Positions that relied on concealment suddenly became death traps. At the test grounds in Hawaii, American engineers evaluated these flamethrower systems for reliability and range. Fuel capacity was measured in tens of gallons. Burn time was counted in seconds per burst. Crews trained to fire short, controlled streams to conserve supply. This was not spectacle. It was engineering applied to a specific tactical problem. Japanese doctrine had no equivalent answer. But the hatred went deeper than firepower. The Sherman also erased one of the Japanese army's most important psychological tools, the night counterattack. Japanese units often relied on darkness to close distance, infiltrate lines, and strike suddenly. Against infantry alone, these tactics could be devastating. Against Shermans equipped with searchlights, radios, and supporting artillery, night lost much of its advantage. American armoured units could form defensive boxes, engines idled, turrets traversed slowly. Any movement detected was met with immediate illumination and fire. Japanese soldiers attempting night approaches reported engagement within seconds, not minutes. Surprise evaporated. Fuel logistics amplified the imbalance. The Sherman's gasoline consumption was heavy, but the United States could afford it. Fuel dumps followed the advance. Tankers came ashore alongside troops. Japanese units, by contrast, often rationed fuel to the point where vehicles were immobilized deliberately, dug in as static pillboxes. Once fixed in place, they became targets rather than weapons. There was also a command and control gap that the Sherman exposed mercilessly. Japanese armoured units operated with limited inter-vehicle communication. Orders were pre-planned. Adaptation in combat was slow. American tank platoons could shift axes of attack, redistribute fire, or withdraw and re-engage within minutes. Japanese commanders often learned a position had failed only after it went silent. Here is where the story becomes complicated. The Sherman was not immune. Japanese gunners learned to aim for thinner side armour, mines disabled tracks. Artillery could kill any tank if it hit, and yet the balance never shifted. Because every time the Japanese adapted tactically, the Americans adapted systemically. If mines increased, infantry cleared them. If ambushes intensified, reconnaissance expanded. If a road became lethal, engineers built another in days. The Sherman did not operate alone. It was part of a machine that absorbed losses and continued forward. There are field reports from Okinawa describing engagements at ranges under 50 yards. Shermans fired directly into cave mouths until the rock collapsed. In one account, a tank fired over a dozen high-explosive rounds into a single position in under 5 minutes. The gun barrel overheated. The crew waited, cooled it, and resumed. The position fell. For Japanese defenders, this was demoralizing, not dramatic, not heroic. Just methodical. Failure modes existed. Shermans burned when penetrated. Ammunition storage could ignite. Early models lacked improved wet stowage, increasing fire risk. Crews knew this. Casualty rates reflected it. But even here the system responded. Design changes reduced risk. Training emphasized evacuation. Replacement crews were available. The unintended consequence was resentment. Japanese soldiers came to view the Sherman not as a worthy opponent, but as an insult. A crude, mass-produced object that overwhelmed skill and sacrifice through volume and coordination. That resentment shows up in diaries and interrogations. The tank is described as ugly, loud, persistent. It does not behave like a dueling weapon. It behaves like industrial pressure. Zoom out, and the picture sharpens. The Sherman did not win the Pacific War by itself. It filled a gap. It gave American infantry mobile, protected firepower at the exact point where Japanese defences were strongest. It turned prepared positions into liabilities. It shortened battles that might otherwise have dragged on for weeks. It reduced American casualties by transferring risk from exposed soldiers to armoured steel. For the Japanese army, built around infantry endurance and localised counterattack, this was catastrophic. Their system could not scale to meet it. Their industry could not replace losses at the same rate. Their doctrine could not neutralise a weapon that refused to play by traditional rules. By the end of the war, Shermans littered Pacific Islands, many still rusting where they stopped. Museums display them now as symbols. Blueprints are declassified. Production numbers are studied in classrooms. What the Sherman proved is not that armour is invincible. It proved that adequacy, multiplied and coordinated, can be more decisive than brilliance. Obsolete is a word for peacetime. In combat, there is only what works, and what the enemy learns to hate because it never stops coming.